The crystal towers of Zephyr Prime stretched toward 3 purple suns, casting rainbow shadows across the meeting chamber where 12 species had gathered to decide Earth's fate. Ambassador Vexithera stood at the center of the vast circular room, her 4 arms gesturing as holographic displays showed images of the 3rd planet from Sul. "Look at them," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had studied humans for decades. 200 years since they discovered fire-powered flight. They still use chemical rockets to escape their gravity well. Their fastest. Ships take months to travel between their own planets. The assembled delegates leaned forward in their various forms of seating. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and a few existed as pure energy contained in crystalline shells. But they all shared the same expression of dismissive superiority as they watched footage of human cities and military installations. Council Admiral Kithros of the Hegemony tapped his clawed fingers against the armrest of his floating chair. His species had been traveling between stars for over 3,000 years. The idea that these barely evolved primates could pose any threat seemed laughable. "Their weapons are primitive," Kithros said, pointing at images of human warships. "Metal projectiles fired by explosive charges, nuclear fission bombs that contaminate their own environment. They fight wars on a single planet's surface instead of controlling space itself." Ambassador Siltarin from the Confederation of Minds projected her thoughts directly into the translation matrix. Her people had evolved beyond physical bodies eons ago, existing as pure consciousness. To her, humans seemed like children playing, with dangerous toys they didn't understand. "The intelligence reports show they have no faster-than-light communication," she observed. "Their military commanders cannot coordinate across their own solar system in real time. How can such a species threaten our established territories?" Vexithara activated another display, showing human expansion efforts. Crude colony ships crawled between Earth and Mars at speeds that made the assembled delegates shake their heads in pity. A journey that would take a council ship mere hours required months of human effort. "They are expanding too quickly for their level of development," Vexithera continued. "Our projections show they will establish mining operations in 17 systems within the next 50 of their years. These systems fall within our protected sphere of influence." The debate that followed was brief and one-sided. After representatives stood to voice their concerns about allowing such a primitive species to interfere with established galactic order. The humans had not even been contacted yet, having failed to develop the basic technologies required for civilized first contact protocols. Delegate Morthak of the Crystal Hierarchies spoke with the slow, grinding voice of his silicon-based people. "In our experience, carbon-based species at this level of development respond well to displays of superior force. A show of strength followed by offers of protection and guidance usually results in peaceful integration." "Agreed," said Fleet Commander Zarketh of the Warrior Clans. "We have successfully brought 47 species into the galactic community using standard intimidation protocols. The humans should be no different. If anything, they should be easier to convince given their obvious technological limitations." Admiral Kithros called for the formal vote. The question was simple. Authorize Operation Cleansing Dawn, a limited military action designed to demonstrate galactic superiority and force human compliance with established territorial boundaries. The vote was unanimous. 12 species, representing thousands of worlds and trillions of sentient beings, agreed that humanity needed to be taught their place in the cosmic order. "The operation will be swift and decisive," Kithros announced as the council chamber began to empty. "We will position the fleet at the edge of their solar system and broadcast standard surrender terms. When they realize the futility of resistance, they will accept our guidance. This is how it has always been done." Vexithera remained behind as the other delegates departed for their ships. She studied the human data one more time, focusing on something that had been bothering her during the presentations. The humans seemed to have an unusual number of military installations for a species that had only recently achieved spaceflight. Their orbital platforms and defensive networks appeared more extensive than necessary for protection against natural threats like asteroids. She dismissed the concern with a flutter of her secondary arms. Every young species went through a paranoid phase when they first ventured into space. The humans would outgrow their primitive fears once they understood the benefits of galactic citizenship. The armada assembled at the staging point took 3 days to organize. 847 vessels representing the combined military might of the Galactic Council arranged themselves in the traditional formation that had intimidated countless worlds into submission. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons took position at the center, surrounded by swift attack cruisers and support vessels equipped with the most advanced technology in known space. Admiral Kithros stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the final preparations through viewports that offered a direct view of space without technological interference. His tactical officers reported full readiness across all fleet elements. "Begin the jump sequence," he commanded. The fleet's hyperspace generators created a coordinated bubble of altered space-time that would carry them across the galaxy in a matter of hours. This was the moment where human resistance would crumble, before it could begin. No species had ever withstood the sight of a full Council fleet emerging from hyperspace near their homeworld. As the stars streaked past in the familiar patterns of faster-than-light travel, Admiral Kithros reviewed the battle plan one final time. The fleet would emerge at the outer edge of the Sol system, well beyond the range of any primitive human weapons. They would broadcast surrender terms and wait for the inevitable response. Human military doctrine, according to their intelligence, favored large, slow-moving vessels designed for prolonged engagement at close range. Their tactics were crude and predictable based on patterns established during their planet-bound conflicts. They had never faced an enemy that could strike from beyond their weapons' reach, then withdraw before they could respond. The Admiral expected the entire operation to conclude within hours of arrival. The humans would see the massive fleet, realize their hopeless situation, and accept Council authority. Standard post-contact protocols would then establish human Earth as a protected world under galactic supervision. It was a plan that had worked perfectly for over 1,000 years across dozens of first-contact scenarios. There was no reason to believe these particular primitives would react any differently than all the others who had come before them. The hyperspace jump concluded with the familiar sensation of reality reasserting itself around the fleet. Stars resumed their normal appearance as the Council Armada entered normal space at the predetermined coordinates. Admiral Kithros looked at the tactical displays showing the Sol system spread out before them, ready to begin humanity's education in the realities of galactic power. He had no idea that the next few hours would shatter everything. The Galactic Council thought they knew about warfare, about human nature, and about what happened when a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting itself finally found a common enemy. The moment Admiral Kithros emerged from hyperspace, he knew something was wrong. The Sol system spread before the galactic fleet looked nothing like the intelligence reports had suggested. Instead of a few scattered mining stations and primitive orbital platforms, the entire system buzzed with activity that made his tactical officers scramble to update their sensor readings. "Sir," reported his chief scanner operator, a nervous Velthari whose tentacles quivered as she worked. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. These readings don't match our projections." Kithros studied the displays with growing unease. Asteroid belts that should have contained only rock and ice showed signs of extensive modification. Metal structures extended from what had appeared to be natural formations. The space between planets crawled with movement that his sensors struggled to classify. "Begin standard first contact protocols," he ordered, pushing aside his concerns. 800 ships were more than enough to handle any surprises these primitives might have prepared. The communications officer opened a channel that would broadcast across all human frequencies. Admiral Kithros had delivered this speech dozens of times to dozens of worlds. The words came automatically. Primitive inhabitants of the Sol system, you are in the presence of the Galactic Council fleet. Your expansion beyond your home system violates established territorial boundaries. You will cease all military activities and prepare to receive Council representatives. Resistance is futile. You have 1 of your hours to respond with your surrender. The response came faster than expected. A human voice, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard, crackled through the communication system with an energy that caught everyone on the bridge off guard. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Forces aboard the UES Defiance. To the unknown fleet that just threatened my home system, I have a message for you. There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. You picked the wrong species to threaten. Before Admiral Kithros could respond, his tactical officer shouted a warning that sent ice through his veins. Multiple missile launches detected. Contacts incoming from 17 different vectors. The main display erupted in a storm of warning indicators. What the Council fleet had dismissed as lifeless asteroids suddenly blazed with the heat signatures of massive weapons systems. Kinetic bombardment platforms that had been hidden in plain sight opened fire with projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. Admiral Kithros watched in disbelief as the first wave of human attacks struck his outer perimeter. These weren't the crude chemical rockets their intelligence had described. The humans were firing solid metal projectiles accelerated to devastating velocities using electromagnetic systems that shouldn't have been possible with their technology. Level, evasive maneuvers, he commanded, but the traditional Council formation was designed for intimidation, not combat. The massive dreadnoughts couldn't dodge quickly enough to avoid weapons they hadn't known existed. The first Council ship to die was the cruiser Harmony's Light. A tungsten rod moving at 12% of light speed punched through its shields. Like they weren't there, continuing through the hull and emerging from the other side in a spray of superheated metal and escaping atmosphere. Sir, we're detecting movement from what appeared to be civilian vessels, reported the scanner operator, her voice rising in panic. Colony ships are changing course and, by the void, they're launching fighters. What happened next violated every assumption the Galactic Council held about civilized warfare. The humans weren't trying to meet them in honorable ship-to-ship combat. They were fighting like animals, using every dirty trick and underhanded tactic imaginable. Civilian cargo haulers that had been drifting innocently through the system suddenly lit up their drives and revealed hidden weapon systems. Mining equipment, designed for asteroid processing, became improvised mass drivers, hurling chunks of metal and ice at Council ships. Even worse, the humans seemed to have no regard for their own safety, launching suicide attacks that no sane species would consider. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos again, broadcasting on open frequencies for everyone to hear. All units, execute Protocol 7. Show these invaders what happens when you threaten Earth. Protocol 7, as Admiral Kithros was about to learn, meant that humanity stopped pretending to fight fair. The asteroid mining stations that had looked so primitive suddenly revealed their true nature. Each one was actually a heavily fortified weapons platform designed to look like civilian infrastructure. Massive rail guns emerged from concealed positions, beginning a bombardment that forced the Council fleet to scatter, but the humans weren't done. Ships that had appeared to be simple patrol vessels revealed themselves as carriers, launching swarms of small craft that moved with a speed and agility that made Council pilots sick to watch. These weren't following any known fighter combat doctrine. They swarmed like insects, coordinating attacks that seemed random but resulted in devastating concentrated fire. "They're targeting our command ships specifically," reported the tactical officer. "Somehow they've identified our fleet structure and they're going after our coordination nodes." Admiral Kithros realized with growing horror that the humans had been watching and learning since the moment his fleet arrived. They'd identified the Council's standard formation, figured out which ships were likely to contain command functions, and adapted their tactics accordingly. A human fighter squadron screamed past the bridge viewports, so close that Kithros could see the pilot's face through the transparent aluminum canopy. The human was smiling, actually smiling while flying a combat mission that should have terrified any rational being. The scanner operator's voice reached a new level of panic. "Sir, I'm detecting some kind of stealth vessels moving through our formation. They're using our own engine emissions to mask their approach." Before anyone could respond, explosions began erupting throughout the Council fleet. Human ships that had somehow infiltrated their formation without being detected were launching point-blank attacks against the largest vessels. They'd used the chaos of the initial missile barrage to slip into firing position. "This is impossible," Admiral Kithros muttered, watching his carefully organized fleet dissolve into confusion. "They're primitives. They don't have the technology or experience for these tactics." His communications officer looked up from her station with an expression of pure terror. "Sir, I've been monitoring human communications. They're not speaking like people fighting for their lives. They're enjoying this." Admiral Kithros demanded to hear the intercepted transmissions for himself. What he heard made his blood run cold. Human pilots were joking with each other while conducting combat maneuvers that should have been impossible. They were sharing targeting data and coordinating attacks with a casual efficiency that suggested they'd been preparing for this exact scenario for years. Worse yet, they were adapting to Council tactics in real time, learning from each engagement and sharing the information across their entire fleet. "Hostile formation breaking apart," reported the tactical officer. Sir, they're not running. They're repositioning for individual attack runs." The humans had abandoned any pretense of formation fighting. Instead, each ship was operating independently, using hit-and-run tactics that made it impossible for the Council fleet to respond effectively. They would appear from unexpected angles, launch devastating attacks, then disappear before return fire could be coordinated. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the communications static one more time, and Admiral Kithros could hear the smile in her words. "Council fleet, you came here expecting to fight primitives. Instead, you found a species that's been preparing for war since we first looked up at the stars. This is just the beginning." As if to prove her point, new contacts began appearing on the scanners. More human ships were arriving from the outer system, and these ones looked different, larger, more heavily armed. Ships that had clearly been designed for one purpose: killing anything that threatened Earth. Admiral Kithros realized that his fleet hadn't stumbled into a quick intimidation mission. They'd walked into a carefully prepared trap, and the humans had been waiting for someone exactly like them to spring it. Captain Talara of the Council's science vessel, Harmony's Edge, watched the battle unfold from what should have been a safe distance. Her ship was equipped with the most advanced sensors in the fleet, designed to study new species and catalog their capabilities. What she was recording now would have been impossible to believe if she hadn't seen it herself. The humans were fighting like nothing in her people's database of galactic warfare. Every rule of civilized combat, every assumption about how spacefaring species conducted military operations was being shattered by these supposedly primitive creatures. "Captain," her communications officer called out, his usually calm voice cracking with stress, "I'm monitoring human tactical channels. You need to hear this." Talara listened to the intercepted transmissions and felt her understanding of warfare crumble. The humans weren't just coordinating their attacks. They were celebrating each successful hit like it was some kind of game. Pilots whooped with joy when they destroyed Council ships. Ground control operators shared jokes while directing missile strikes that killed thousands. "They're treating this like entertainment," she whispered, horrified by the realization. Her tactical officer, a young Kethri whose scales had turned pale with fear, pointed at the main display. "Captain, look at attack pattern 77 Alpha. They're using a damaged frigate as bait." Talara watched in sick fascination as a human ship that was clearly dying from reactor damage suddenly accelerated toward a Council destroyer. The alien, Captain, following standard protocols, moved to assist what appeared to be a distressed vessel. The moment the destroyer came within range, the human frigate detonated its remaining nuclear warheads in a suicide attack that vaporized both ships. "But the human crew," Talara stammered. "They killed themselves just to destroy one of our vessels." "Not just killed themselves," her communications officer corrected, his voice hollow. "I intercepted their final transmission. They volunteered for that mission. They were arguing over who got to ram the enemy ship. The implications hit Talara like a physical blow. These humans weren't just willing to die for their world. They were eager to trade their lives for enemy casualties at ratios that made no tactical sense. A species that fought with such disregard for their own survival was beyond anything the Council had ever encountered. On the main tactical display, the pattern became clearer with each passing minute. Human forces were employing every underhanded tactic imaginable. They broadcast false surrender signals, then opened fire when Council ships approached to accept their capitulation. They used civilian evacuation channels to coordinate military strikes. They even transmitted fake distress calls that lured rescue vessels into carefully prepared ambushes. "They're not following any recognized rules of engagement," Talara reported to Admiral Kithros. "They're treating this like total warfare where any tactic that achieves victory is acceptable." Admiral Kithros's response crackled with static and growing desperation. "How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated they were barely past the nuclear age. These tactics require decades of military evolution." Talara studied the sensor readings and realized something that made her stomach turn. "Sir, I think they've been preparing for this specific scenario. Look at the positioning of their defensive platforms. Look at how quickly they adapted to our formation tactics. They weren't surprised by our arrival. They were ready for it." The truth was worse than anyone on the Council fleet had imagined. Humanity hadn't stumbled into spaceflight and accidentally expanded into Council territory. They'd been watching the galaxy for years, studying every transmission they could intercept, learning about galactic civilization and preparing for the day when someone would come to put them in their place. A new wave of human attacks began, and these were different from anything that had come before. Instead of the chaotic swarm tactics they'd used initially, the humans were now demonstrating coordinated precision that rivaled the best Council formations. "They're learning from our responses," Talara realized with growing horror. "Each wave of attacks incorporates lessons from the previous engagement. They're adapting faster than we can counter." Her sensor officer, a nervous Zilthari whose eye stalks quivered with each explosion, called attention to something even more disturbing. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from human vessels. They appear to be modifying their weapon systems in real time." Talara focused her instruments on the nearest human destroyer and couldn't believe what she was seeing. The ship's weapon systems were being physically reconfigured during combat. Plasma conduits were being rerouted, power systems jury-rigged, and entirely new weapon configurations assembled using nothing but spare parts and desperate ingenuity. "They're turning mining equipment into weapons," she reported. "Industrial cutting lasers, cargo manipulator arms, even their waste disposal systems. Everything is being converted into something that can hurt us." The human destroyer fired its improvised weapons array at a Council cruiser. The attack shouldn't have worked. The energy outputs were wrong, the targeting systems were clearly improvised, and the whole setup looked like it would explode if operated, beyond minimal power levels. It worked perfectly. The jury-rigged plasma cannon punched through the cruiser's shields and hull, creating a hole large enough to fly a fighter through. Talara's communications officer suddenly went rigid with shock. "Captain, I've been monitoring human engineering channels. They're sharing technical data in real time. Every modification, every successful improvisation, every new tactic is being transmitted to their entire fleet instantly." "What do you mean?" Talara demanded. "They're not just learning from their own experiences. Every human ship is learning from every other human ship's experiences. If one vessel figures out how to penetrate our shields, within minutes every human vessel knows how to do it. The implications were staggering. The Council fleet was fighting an enemy that was getting stronger with each passing minute. Every engagement taught the humans something new, and that knowledge was immediately available to their entire force. A squadron of human fighters screamed past Talara's ship, so close that she could see battle damage on their hulls. These pilots had been in continuous combat for hours, but instead of showing signs of fatigue or stress, they were flying with increasing precision and coordination. "They're not getting tired," her tactical officer observed with naked fear. "If anything, they're getting better. How is that possible?" Talara pulled up psychological profiles from their database of known species. What she found made her feel sick. Humans were one of the few species that actually improved under stress. Combat situations that would exhaust or demoralize other races seemed to energize them, making them faster, stronger, and more creative. "They enjoy the challenge," she realized. "The more pressure we put on them, the better they perform." A new alarm sounded as her sensors detected incoming missiles. But these weren't like the previous human weapons. These projectiles were moving in patterns that suggested they were learning and adapting during flight. "Evasive maneuvers," Talara ordered, but it was too late. The human missiles had observed the Harmony's Edge's previous evasion patterns and adjusted their approach accordingly. They struck the science vessel's engines with surgical precision, disabling propulsion without destroying the ship entirely. As emergency power systems activated, Talara realized that even the missile attack had been calculated. The humans hadn't destroyed her ship because they wanted prisoners. They wanted to learn more about Council technology and tactics by studying a captured vessel. Through the static-filled communication system, she could hear Admiral Kithros trying to coordinate a retreat. But retreat was no longer an option. The humans had positioned themselves to cut off the Council fleet's escape routes, herding the alien ships into increasingly desperate situations. Talara watched her tactical displays and realized that the battle was already over. The Council fleet had walked into a trap designed by a species that understood war in ways no civilized race could comprehend. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their world. They were fighting to teach the galaxy a lesson about what happened when someone threatened Earth. And they were enjoying every minute of it. The turning point came when Admiral Sarah Chen stopped playing defense. For 3 hours, the human fleet had been content to pick apart the Council formation from long range, using hit-and-run tactics that frustrated their enemies while minimizing human casualties. But as Admiral Kithros tried to reorganize his scattered forces for a coordinated withdrawal, Chen made a decision that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen." Her voice cut through the tactical channels with crystal clarity. "Execute boarding protocol Alpha. It's time to take this fight up close and personal." Admiral Kithros felt his blood freeze as he watched the human fleet suddenly change tactics. Instead of maintaining their safe distance, human ships began accelerating directly toward his remaining vessels. This violated every principle of space combat doctrine. No sane commander would close to point-blank range with a technologically superior enemy. "They're going to ram us," his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic. But ramming wasn't what the humans had in mind. As the distance closed, Council sensors detected thousands of small heat signatures launching from the human vessels. At first, Admiral Kithros thought they were missiles or torpedoes. The truth was much worse. "Sir?" His scanner operator's voice cracked with disbelief. "Those aren't weapons. They're boarding pods." The humans were launching themselves directly at Council ships in armored capsules that were little more than engines strapped to life support systems. Each pod contained between 5 and 10 human soldiers equipped with nothing but personal weapons and cutting tools. Admiral Kithros watched in fascinated horror as the first wave of boarding pods struck his flagship. The primitive-looking capsules attached themselves to the Eternal Dominion's hull like metallic parasites, then began cutting through the outer armor with plasma torches that burned with the intensity of small stars. "Repel boarders," he commanded, activating internal security protocols that should have dealt with any invasion attempt. The first human soldier to breach the hull of the Eternal Dominion was a woman whose armor was scorched black from the cutting process. She emerged from the smoking hole in the corridor wall like some ancient mythological demon, carrying weapons that looked crude compared to Council technology, but proved devastatingly effective against living targets. Admiral Kithros watched the security feeds in growing disbelief as human soldiers flowed through his ship's corridors like a tide of violence. His security forces were equipped with energy shields, advanced armor, and weapons that should have made them superior to any boarding party. But the humans weren't fighting like any boarding party in recorded galactic history. They moved with a coordination that suggested they'd trained for this exact scenario countless times. Every human soldier seemed to know exactly where to go and what to target. They flowed around Council defensive positions like water, finding weak points that shouldn't have existed and exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. Even worse, they were enjoying themselves. Security cameras picked up human soldiers laughing and joking as they fought their way through the ship. One human was heard commenting to his squad mate, "This is just like the training simulations except easier." "How is this possible?" Admiral Kithros demanded as reports flooded in from across his fleet. Human boarding parties were simultaneously attacking 17 different Council vessels, and they were all following the same impossibly detailed tactical plan. His intelligence officer, a trembling Vexathani, whose tentacles had turned pale with stress, provided an answer that chilled everyone on the bridge. "Sir, we've been monitoring human communications. They've been planning these boarding operations since before we arrived. They have detailed schematics of our ship designs." The implications hit Admiral Kithros like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just detected his fleet's approach and prepared defenses. They'd studied Council technology extensively enough to create detailed boarding plans for ships they'd never seen before. But even that revelation paled compared to what happened next. As human soldiers secured critical areas of Council vessels, they began doing something unprecedented in the history of galactic warfare. They started stealing enemy technology in real time, ripping advanced systems out of alien ships and somehow integrating them into their own equipment. Commander Thexali of the destroyer Swift Justice watched through security feeds as human engineers worked with impossible speed to remove his ship's primary energy cannon. They were using crude tools and apparent guesswork, but somehow they managed to extract the weapon system without triggering any of its built-in security measures. "They're taking our weapons," he reported to Admiral Kithros. "But that's impossible. Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. They don't have the knowledge base to understand how any of this works." The answer came from Captain Talara's crippled science vessel. Her analysis of human learning patterns had revealed something that terrified every Council commander who heard it. "They don't need to understand how it works," she transmitted. "They're reverse engineering our technology by trial and error, and they're sharing successful methods across their entire force in real time. Every human soldier who figures out how to operate a Council weapon immediately teaches every other human soldier the same technique." Admiral Kithros watched his tactical displays with growing horror as human ships began sporting alien weapon systems. The installations were crude, obviously improvised, and created energy patterns that made his engineers weep. But they worked. Human destroyer that had been armed with nothing but kinetic weapons suddenly fired a plasma beam that punched through a Council cruiser's shields. The weapon shouldn't have functioned when connected to human power systems, but somehow the humans had made it work anyway. "Sir," his communications officer reported with a voice that had gone completely flat, "the humans are broadcasting technical data on open channels. They're sharing information about how to integrate our technology with their systems." Within an hour, the human fleet had transformed itself. Ships that had been fighting with primitive weapons were now armed with hybrid systems that combined human engineering with stolen Council technology. The results were monstrous abominations that violated every principle of proper technological integration, and they were terrifyingly effective. The human heavy cruiser Indomitable had somehow attached 3 different types of Council energy weapons to its hull, creating a firing pattern that no Council ship had defenses against. The weapons shouldn't have been able to operate together, but human engineers had simply brute-forced the integration problems with solutions that worked, even if they shouldn't have. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the communications chaos once again, and this time Admiral Kithros could hear satisfaction in her tone. Council fleet, you came here with superior technology and assumed that would be enough. You forgot that humans have spent our entire evolutionary history taking things that don't belong to us and making them work better than they did before. As if to prove her point, a squadron of human fighters screamed past the Eternal Dominion firing weapons that were clearly Council design but modified beyond recognition. The energy beams moved faster, hit harder, and recharged quicker than the original specifications had allowed. Admiral Kithros realized that his fleet wasn't just losing the battle, they were losing it to an enemy that was literally stealing their technological advantages and improving upon them in real time. The humans had turned the Council's own superiority against them, and there was no defense against an enemy that could adapt faster than you could react. 6 days after the Battle of Sol ended, Ambassador Vexathara stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council with news that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The crystal chambers of Zephyr Prime that had witnessed humanity's condemnation now echoed with panicked voices as delegates tried to understand how 800 ships had been reduced to fewer than 200 survivors. The holographic displays showed the aftermath of what military historians would later call the most decisive defeat in galactic history. The human forces did not accept our withdrawal as victory, Vexathara reported, her forearms trembling as she activated the displays. They pursued our retreating vessels and continued attacking until we were forced to jump to hyperspace with critical damage. Council Admiral Kithros, his uniform torn and his pride shattered, stood beside her with the hollow eyes of someone who had seen his entire worldview destroyed. The mighty hegemony fleet that had been his pride was now scattered wreckage drifting through the Sol system. "How many casualties?" asked Fleet Commander Zarketh, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer would be devastating. 68% of our forces destroyed or captured, Kithros replied, the words falling like stones in the silent chamber. Unknown thousands dead, 7 command vessels lost, and that's not the worst part. Delegate Morthak of the Crystal, Hierarchies leaned forward, his silicon-based form grinding with the sound of breaking stone. What could possibly be worse than losing 2/3 of the combined fleet? Vexathara activated another set of displays, and the assembled delegates fell silent with horror. The images showed human ships unlike anything in their intelligence files. Vessels that combined stolen Council technology with human engineering in ways that should have been impossible. They kept our ships, she explained. Every vessel they captured has been reverse-engineered and integrated into their fleet. They now possess Council-level technology combined with their own tactical innovations. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. The humans hadn't just defended their territory. They had acquired the technological capabilities to threaten the entire galactic community. Representative Siltaran's thoughts projected pure terror into the translation matrix. Show us the long-range sensor data. The holographic displays shifted to show deep space around the Sol system. What they revealed made several delegates cry out in languages that the translation system couldn't properly handle. Human expeditionary fleets were already moving toward Council space. The first attacks began 18 hours after our retreat. Admiral Kithros reported with the dead voice of a man whose military career had ended in total failure. 3 separate human task forces have struck at our outer colonies. They're using our own technology against us, and they've improved it. The tactical displays showed the results of humanity's first offensive operations. Human ships equipped with hybrid weapon systems had struck military installations in the Kethri system, the Velthari colonies, and the outer hegemony worlds. Each attack had been swift, brutal, and designed to capture rather than destroy. They're not trying to conquer territory, Vexthera continued. They're gathering intelligence and resources. Every facility they capture gives them more council technology to study and integrate. Delegate Morthak's grinding voice carried a note of desperate hope. Surely they must be willing to negotiate. No species maintains an aggressive posture indefinitely. Admiral Kithros activated a recording that answered that question with chilling finality. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice filled the chamber, transmitted from her flagship as it operated deep within Council space. To the members of the Galactic Council who voted to attack Earth, you have taught us a valuable lesson about the reality of galactic politics. We are grateful for the education. Now it's time for us to return the favor. The recording continued with tactical updates that made the assembled delegates sick with fear. Human forces had established forward operating bases in 3 different star systems. They were using captured Council vessels to infiltrate shipping lanes and gather intelligence. Worst of all, they were recruiting local populations who had grievances against Council authority. They're turning our own subjects against us, Fleet Commander Zarketh observed with barely controlled rage. Species that have been peaceful Council members for centuries are providing support to human operations. Vexthara nodded grimly. The humans are offering them something we never did. They're offering them revenge against the species that conquered their worlds generations ago. The truth was spreading through Council space like a virus. Humanity had done the impossible. They had defeated the combined might of the galactic community and proven that the Council's authority could be challenged. Subjugated species that had accepted their place for centuries were beginning to remember what independence felt like. How many systems have declared independence since the battle? Asked Ambassador Siltaran, though her mental projection suggested she already knew. The answer would be catastrophic. 47 worlds have renounced Council authority, Vexthara replied. 16 more have requested human protection from Council retaliation. The rebellion is spreading faster than we can respond. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions as delegates realized the full scope of the disaster. The humans hadn't just won a military victory. They had shattered the myth of Council invincibility that had kept the galaxy peaceful for over 1,000 years. Admiral Kithros activated one final display that showed the current military situation. Human fleets were operating with impunity throughout Council space, striking targets of opportunity while avoiding major fleet engagements. They had learned from the Battle of Sol and were applying those lessons on a galactic scale. They fight like nothing we've ever encountered, he reported. They don't follow any established rules of warfare. They use psychological operations, guerrilla tactics, and total war doctrines that target civilian infrastructure alongside military assets. Can we negotiate with them? Delegate Morthak asked desperately. Vexthara's response crushed any hope of peaceful resolution. We tried. The humans' terms are simple. Complete withdrawal of Council authority from all systems within 50 light-years of Earth, reparations for the attack on their homeworld, and recognition of human territorial claims throughout the local stellar group. Those terms are impossible, Fleet Commander Zarketh protested. They're demanding we abandon 1/3 of our territory. The alternative is worse, Admiral Kithros replied quietly. I've studied their tactical patterns. They're not interested in coexistence. They want to make sure that no one ever threatens Earth again. And they're willing to dismantle the entire galactic order to achieve that goal. The recording of Admiral Chen's voice played one final message that left the chamber in stunned silence. You came to our system expecting to fight primitives. Instead, you found a species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare on a single world. Every human conflict, every military innovation, every tactical lesson learned in blood was preparation for the day someone tried to conquer us. You have awakened something that refuses to be contained. As the delegates filed out of the chamber to contact their home governments, Ambassador Vexithara remained behind, staring at the tactical displays that showed human forces advancing through council space like an unstoppable tide. The species she had dismissed as barely evolved primates had become the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, and they showed no signs of stopping their advance until every world that had voted to attack Earth understood the true cost of underestimating humanity. The age of council dominance was over. The age of human expansion had begun.